Hello, everybody. This is Kim Scott. Welcome to the Radical Respect Podcast.
And I'm with Kim as well. This is Wesley Faulkner, her co-host for this episode, and really excited to. This one's kind of special because it's, even though our podcast family doesn't know that necessarily the gaps between our recording episodes, this is one in which we haven't had another episode since South by Southwest. So I'm really happy that we're back together again.
Yes, so am I. South by was so much fun. Thank you for helping me to launch Radical Respect at South by Southwest. And the book actually formally comes out on May 7th. So I have in my hands an early copy of the book. And Wesley, you'll have one too. But to celebrate the actual launch of the book, I'd love to talk about your idea, Wesley, because you and I just had a great conversation about bottoms up checks and balances, which is a new idea. And I'd love to talk about it.
Yes, and I'm just going to say this because I think you might be too shy to do that. If you're watching or listening to this, hit pause, and if it's May 7th or before, pre-order the book. If it's May 7th or after, order the book. So I just want to make
buy
sure
the
to
damn
reiterate
book.
that. Buy the book. Buy the book. If you like this and to support our work, please buy the book. It's extremely important. And
Thank you.
And it's really important at the very beginning of sales to make sure to get it on the week of the release, just to make sure that the list people who create everything together and say which is the best. We want this to try to raise the statue so we can promote equitable workplace for everybody. So please do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Now back to the subject. Creating checks and balances from the bottom up. It's something that I was noodling on about my own personal evolution through how I envisioned work, and it's three discrete phases. One where it feels like I was naive and kind of realizing that there's things that I need to change, fundamentally wrong with me, to the evolution of, oh my gosh, the system is fundamentally broken. And in order to feel some sort of level of power or agency, there are things that I can do to help with building those things that don't exist. And so let's start with the first phase, the area of naivete, where I thought that work itself is, and especially in a capitalist society, where if you work hard, if you give it your all, that whatever you put in is what you're going to get back in terms of recognition, promotions, or even advancements. So, or raises. So I thought that when I started running into a problem with the system, and if the system wasn't paying me back, I wasn't working hard enough.
You were blaming yourself.
Yeah, it's me. I'm not playing the system right. I'm messing up, or I'm not contributing things that are interpreted as valuable. So what do I need to change? What do I need to, how do I need to represent myself so that the work that I do is kind of rewarded? So I obviously am not doing good enough work. So that's why I'm not getting promoted, and that's why I'm not getting raises.
And this, by the way, I just want to pause. This is really painful because I think, especially early in our careers, when we get feedback that we haven't achieved something, we do blame ourselves. And we take that feedback, like, it's really important to remember that you don't have to agree with all the feedback that's coming your way, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's bias, prejudice, or bullying masquerading as feedback.
Yes, and when we talked about bias, prejudice, and bullying, like when someone takes your work and takes credit for your work, for example, or just say this isn't good enough, that's all like inwardly directed, and that it's a form of gaslighting, but it works, and that's why people do it. And so that's
before you go on to phase number 2, can I share a story about a time when this happened to me? And then you can, if you want to, share a story. I think this is what you're talking about, but tell me if I've got it right. So at one point in my career, there was a guy who got promoted, not one, but 2 levels ahead of me. And when the email went out from the CEO about why this guy was getting promoted, it turned out he was running a business that was smaller than mine, growing more slowly than mine, and he had more people on his team. So it was less profitable than the business I was running. And so I went to HR and I said, try to help me understand this. Like, why is he getting promoted 2 levels ahead of me when my business is growing faster and it is bigger, and and I have fewer people than he does, and so it's more profitable. And the HR person said to me, well, it's all about span of control, and because he has more people than you, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, like, what? This was real gaslighting. And they were like, what don't you understand about span of control? He's got more people. Like, it was. And then I started feeling like, did I miss something? Like, was I supposed to hire a bigger team unnecessarily and run a less profitable business? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of those. I think they said that like people who are underrepresented feel like they have to work, they have to have this so much of work that they've created um, to the point where it's like unavoidable that they made such an
Yeah.
impact in order to get promoted. But some people who are in a privileged position, they get promoted on potential. Oh, we see
Yes.
where you could
Yeah.
be going, and we see what
Yeah.
you could be doing, and so that potential is enough to get promoted. And so,
Yes.
yeah, that very very different. So, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. Where
Okay.
I could see that I wasn't getting rewarded for the work that I was producing relative to everyone else, even though it was either on par or better. But I was
Yeah.
being told that it wasn't. So
Yeah.
that was part of it.
Yeah.
And so the second phase was one where recognizing this and like the veil is being lifted a little bit.
Yeah. So it's not
And
really a meritocracy in the way
yes,
that you thought it was.
it's not, but more on a micro level instead of a macro
Mm-hmm.
level. So I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking that maybe it was my manager or maybe it was my coworker or
There
something
was
like
one
that.
bad apple.
One bad apple in a
Yeah.
system that is like on balance good.
Yeah.
Where it's made to correct itself because you don't want to scale inefficiencies, of course, because
Yeah.
that's not good for
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in phase two, I would use the proper channels to try to address this. So talk to my manager if it's an issue with a coworker or a project or
Mm-hmm.
another team, or talk to HR if it's an issue with my manager or upper management
Mm-hmm.
where things were not working the way they should. At least what I
Yeah.
learned about how
Yeah.
business should work. And so in phase two, then I realized that it's it's funny right now. President Trump is in. I know. I'm sorry. I'm bringing
It's
politics in,
okay.
but he's. They're talking about the hush money trial, and David Pecker was one of the first witness, and they're talking about catch and kill, and that's what I
Mm-hmm.
feel like at HR is that they catch
Yeah.
complaints and then they kill it.
Yes.
So
Not
there's
all
a
HR. Not all
not all
HR.
HR, of
There
course,
are
no, of
some
course not.
great HR teams out there, but as we have seen, there are some also catch and kill
Exactly. Yes.
HR teams. Okay.
But I'm talking about more of when there's the corruption in the HR
Yeah.
system is basically there's this spirit of secrecy. Okay,
Yeah.
well you know this is confidential. You don't have to tell anyone. We won't tell anyone and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's just like you're kind of suffering in silence as you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
make sure the right thing is done. And eventually it doesn't get taken care of or things get worse or
Yeah.
the manager or this other person gets tipped off and then the focus is back on you and then eventually
Yeah.
you don't last long at the company.
Sort of like Susan Fowler experienced at Uber, this from
Yes,
HR.
yes, yeah.
And it was interesting. I asked her later, I said, why did you keep going to them? It was clear that they weren't going to solve the problem. And she said, that was how I had to make it
The
clear that
corporate,
there was a
yeah,
problem with this system. Yeah, I had to.
yes.
It was really important to continue to go through the official channels to
Hmm.
demonstrate that they weren't working.
Yes, and if you haven't read that book, it's amazing.
Yes. Or even just the blog post. We'll put
Yes,
a link to it in the show notes.
and if you're looking for her now, it's Susan Rigetti is
Yes.
her last name. Um, but Susan Fowler back then.
Yes.
Um, And so this phase two is where the power is entrenched, and
Mm-hmm.
HR is made to protect the company. And the to protect the company, that's why there's this secrecy, and that's why if you remove the person who's making the complaint, it's a lot easier than removing someone else who's higher, who
Yeah.
has more power to cause more problems. And
Yes.
so if you're at the bottom of the org chart, then it means it's less waves to prune you rather
Yeah.
than someone higher that has other branches coming off of it.
Yeah. So
So
this is a system that sort of explicitly does not have checks and balances.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, it is, at least, I mean, not in the way that you would think of it. Like, not
Yeah.
to make sure that things are the employee wellness and
Yeah.
is valued, and that's the number one priority of HR. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
in
It's a
that system.
system. It's a system that reinforces the power of the powerful as opposed to creating checks and balances on the power of the powerful.
Absolutely, status quo, towing the party line, making
Yep.
sure that no one's out of order. That's what it's made for. Okay, and moving on to phase three. This is
Mm-hmm.
where I feel like I fairly am for any company that I'm with. Is that understanding, generally speaking, most of the structure is corrupt. Once again, not all companies, not all
Yeah.
situations.
There are some great situations out there, but there are
Yes,
also a lot of situations where the right thing is not happening.
yes, and I think when the companies that do the right thing feels, from my sampling, like the exception rather than the rule. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the the understanding is that not not is it's not just the person that's corrupt, but the system itself that deals with the corruption is a little corrupt, and that generally speaking, the control, meaning making sure there's conformity, is the status quo, and that the only way to disrupt it is to build your own checks. And the way to do that is through side doors and through back doors. So
Mm-hmm.
um, moving the conversation outside of this silo, outside of this veil of secrecy that I talked about before, and raising it so that you pull in either tangential players or people who are higher up that have greater fiduciary duty
Yeah.
to make sure that they report this or the show that they're doing signs to mitigate this. So if you talk to legal, if you're talking to a director level, or if you're talking to a VP level, if you're talking to co leads to
Mm-hmm.
HR, and all of the players that have to, like, by law, actually make sure that this stuff is taken care of, or because there are um, lawsuits that could pull in pull them into if it is deemed that what happened was not correct. um, God forbid if you do end up being let go, then
Mm-hmm.
you have higher leverage for severance, so that can help
Yeah.
there if for
Yeah.
some reason you're not able to fix the situation. And then in most of the cases, or some of the cases, it may work or it may not work in terms of them uh, changing your exact situation. But what it can do is elongate the process so that you can have time for find another role, or also, if depending on who's pulling the levers, the person who's causing the harm, a coworker, a manager, or something like that, feels as if when they make your life harder, it's fueling this cycle where it makes their life harder, because
Yeah.
now you've given more evidence to give to more people for them to be involved, for them to ask questions, and so on and so forth.
So is this a version, I think, of doing, I think, first of all, it's very smart to like that. I never thought of it in terms of bottoms up checks and balances, but you can create those. And a version of this is an engineering leader at Google, Mecca Orakeki, I think I'm saying
Hmm.
his last name correctly, has the notion of a difficulty anchor.
Yes.
And he's explaining to underrepresented people that often your work does not get fairly assessed. That, and one of the things you can do is find someone at the company who has kind of a reputation for being a hard ass and asking them for a little bit of help. And then when they come in and say, actually, this was really a difficult project and very well conceived, then it makes it much harder for people to undermine you. Um, so
Absolutely.
that's one example. I think I have another example of how to create bottoms up checks and balances.
I do too, but you go
Okay,
first.
you go first. You go
Okay.
first.
All right. The other thing that I've done,
Mm-hmm.
and I've mentored several people, and this is one of the things that helps my, um, it is almost like gaslight repellent.
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
I ask them whenever they're tasked with anything, is to make a document that spells out. I called it a DOD document, a definition of done. And
Mm-hmm.
so here's what you're asking me to do, here's the time period, and
Mm-hmm.
and this is the spicy part that is sometimes not part of the conversation, is what is the criteria of acceptance, like
Yeah.
when will this be done.
Yes.
And when that is put in at the very beginning, if that's not given, then I had my mentee write it and then send it for acceptance, saying, okay,
Yes.
do you agree to this? And if they agree to this, then you're able to do track changes of,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you said for me to do this, but now you're asking me to do this. And now, so let me just write this down. Is
Yeah.
this what you want me to do? And
Yeah.
this is the timeline you're expecting. And this is what the finished product should look like. And having this kind of um, logbook where not only is it tracking what's going on, but then you're getting acceptance on each one of it. It allows them not to come back and say, well, you didn't do what I asked you to do, and
Yeah.
you didn't turn it in when I said to turn it in, or this is not at all what we talked about. They're able to really say, well, I followed the process, and this is the
Yeah.
process we agreed on. Any changes is based on following direction and your explicit agreement on each part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is very smart. That is a great tip. Okay, folks, are you listening out there? If you feel like your manager tends to move the goalpost on your deliverables, this DoD document
Mm-hmm.
is the answer. I think that's very smart.
Thank you.
And it's
What's your story?
frustrating. I mean, I would also say if you have to do this, start polishing up the resume and looking for other jobs as well, because in theory, uh, there should this is a sign something's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I have another example kind of similar. I at one point was working at a startup and I had gotten equity, and it turned out that they hadn't reported to the IRS my
Mm-hmm.
equity. And so now, uh, they were supposed to have paid because it was, treated like ordinary income. They were supposed to have paid
The
the
tax
IRS.
liability. Yeah.
Yeah, but they hadn't. So now I owed more to the government than I had made, actually. I was
Mm-hmm.
going to lose money. And they didn't want to do the right thing. They didn't want to report it to the IRS, and they were like proposing to me some kind of like, well, you'll make more money this way, but I just wanted everything to be straight. Like I didn't want to play these games. But they kept, it was like one of these gaslighting situations. They kept treating me like I was stupid for not wanting to take this deal. And I was able, it turned out that like one of their board members was like the friend of the friend of a friend of a father of a friend's father. It's like I had some random connection. And it was embarrassing to call this guy and tell him what had happened, but I did it, and that created a check and balance. And they were like, "Oh, we'll report it to the IRS right away." It was like, gosh, is that like, but it was like one of those moments where I was like, is that really what I have to do to get people to do the right thing? But it was, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's
Um,
sad because like sometimes it's the messenger, not the message,
yeah,
where it's
they didn't
there's
treat me seriously, but they were going to
mhm.
damn well treat that guy seriously.
Yeah, it's a filter saying
Yeah.
if that person is respected, then what they say has respect and should be
Yeah.
treated as such. But if they don't respect you,
Yes.
then it
They
it, it
can
devalues
brush
the
me
message.
off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And That's true with a lot of
Yeah.
places.
So it's kind of a way of finding upstanders who don't even realize they're being upstanders. You're just going to them and you're saying, "Here's the story. What do
Hmm.
you think?" You know, and they're like,
Yes.
"Oh," and then, well, could you tell them? Could you know? So
Yes.
I
And
think. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, it's also like when um, we talked about confronting bias, it's saying it is not appropriate to basically
Yeah,
bringing in this thing that is on a separate from you are, but is like against the code of conduct, against the
yeah,
handbook, against the
yeah.
law.
It's a kind
It's
of a
almost
prejudice. Yeah, it's
yes,
statement.
exactly.
Yeah. I think it's so smart. And I think we want to really focus on what folks can do to speak truth to power without blowing up their careers. Because it's so important. So thank you very much for sharing with folks. I think this is an evolution that a lot of people go through. And I think if we can help people understand what reality is earlier in their career, so much the better.
Yeah. And it's a hard road because we are fed this narrative that the
Yeah.
world's fair, the life's fair, and the work that we
Yeah.
do is valuable, and it can cause some extreme mental health issues
Yeah.
because if if you can't make the world make sense, then it feels as if there's no way that you have control or that you can navigate it.
Yeah.
And not feeling stable really puts, I mean, I think if you think about the pandemic, it puts
Yeah.
everyone in a reactionary stance
Yeah.
where they're always on alert. It raises your cortisol, and it pushes a level of stress that is not sustainable.
Yeah.
So it's very important to feel that you have agency and you have choice. And when you go through these channels and you hit a speed bump or brick wall, and someone says, "Sorry, we found no wrongdoing," or "Oh, well, we had a conversation and now it's done," but then it doesn't actually do anything. It can feel like you have no options. Like, okay, now I am trapped in this
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
But being able to really think about all the other ways that are not paved for you, but maybe going off the beaten path just a little bit, can still allow you to find ways to kind of get to the solution. Not every problem has one solution, and so just thinking outside the box sometimes is best.
Yeah. And I think you said something really important there. Like expecting a just world is a fair world is often to be disappointed. However, that doesn't mean that you're the hapless victim of injustice. Like there's a lot of different ways to navigate this world, and I think the tips for how to speak truth to power without blowing up your career: document what's going on, find solidarity, and Wesley, you're exceptionally good at that. Locate the exit nearest you, like figure out what other jobs you could get. Could you go sleep on somebody's couch? Build. Now I'm going to add a fourth thing you can do, which is to create these bottoms up checks and balances. Find someone in the organization who can be helpful to you. That's kind of maybe a form of building solidarity. And then it becomes safer to have these direct conversations, to report to HR, even though HR may be part of the problem, even though they're supposed to be part of the solution. You can tell your story publicly and you can pursue legal options. So we'll be talking a lot more about speaking truth to power without blowing up your career. But in the meantime, thanks everybody. And as Wesley said, go buy a copy of the book and create bottoms up checks and balances if you don't have proper checks and balances in place in your organization.
Thank you. And if you're reading or listening to this after you've purchased the book, let us know what you think. And maybe we'll
Yes.
have you on the show. You can email us at hello at just work
No,
just
hello at
no hello
radicalrespectbook.
radicalrespectbook.com. Yes. And if you're looking to where you should buy the book, go to radicalrespectbook.com and you can click on the link there to get a purchase of the book as well. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening, and also for your feedback. So please send them to us, either via the email that Kim so graciously corrected me on, or you could also put in a comment in your podcast thing that you're listening to, either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever. So, but keep the feedback coming. We want to keep hearing from you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.